I came to Malta at Emmanuel's invitation about a month ago, I met a few other locals, and one of them introduced me to Frank West. Is Frank here? Frank is speaking at 2 p.m. Yeah, Jennifer introduced me to Frank, and Frank then said, you gotta read this book. There's an American living in Malta who is Mr. Transparency. He wrote a book, and he was so transparent in it. And I said, well, blockchain is all about transparency, but everybody talks about it. And here's a man who worked in Switzerland for 12 years, and then went and revealed to the IRS and the DOJ, the Department of Justice in America, all the bank secrecy that was happening in Switzerland. And then they threw him in jail. So a lot of people talk about, risking my life and doing this for the good of society and fighting governments. And here's a man, an American living in Malta now, who wrote a book about it. It's called Lucifer's Banker. He's not Mr. Lucifer, but he's a former banker. And I read this book over the last 3 days. I couldn't put it down. And I went to his house straight from the airport, when I landed here on Saturday from the airport. And now he's here with us. And again, when you read his book, and he's not here to sell his book because he's already cashed in a nice $104 million from the IRS, who paid him a reward for being the whistleblower on the Union Bank of Switzerland, on UBS. But I thought it was so interesting that we talk so much about transparency. We're trying to decentralize all these things. We're trying to not fight governments, but we're trying to live and have our kids live in a less of a governmentally messed up situation. And here's a man who did it all, and now he's, he would hope to say he's retired, but he's not, because he's out there talking to the world and explaining how you should not be sitting on your ass when you see certain inefficiencies, and you should fight them. It took him, I think, 12 years to fight the Department of Justice and the whole system. And now he's at the end of that telling his story to the world. So before we talk about blockchain, decentralizing this, and Gordon is going to talk about the legal system, and Brad Yassar is going to talk about fundraising in the ICO space, then you're going to hear 7 amazing ICOs. I just had to invite him, and I'm so glad that he's here with us. So I'm going to give you this stage, and I would love for you to enlighten our crowd about your amazing story. So Brad Birkenfeld, thank you so much for coming.
Pleasure. Thank you
and the stage is all yours.
Thank you so much, Mike. Thank you for having me. Well, thank you for that nice introduction. Again, my name is Brad Birkenfeld, and I was the UBS whistleblower that exposed the largest and longest tax fraud in the world, hands down. I worked at UBS as a director in Geneva, Switzerland, and I worked on the US desk that we managed 19,000 clients and $20 billion in assets. This was offshore money, undeclared money. And what had happened was, you have to understand Geneva, Switzerland, where they have bank secrecy. Bank secrecy is the foundation of why people put their money there. You hide it from a spouse, you hide it from a business partner, you hide it from the IRS. So what had happened was that Geneva had 130 banks doing this illegal business for decades. And Swiss bank secrecy came into play back in 1934 when the Third Reich came to power. Adolf Hitler had ordered anyone to be shot who moved money outside of Germany because they needed it for the war effort. After World War I, they had huge reparations, and certainly they were preparing for, unfortunately, World War II. The Swiss countered with Swiss bank secrecy in Article 47 in 1934. Why is that important? Because again, that was the foundation of why people put their money in Switzerland to hide it. Billions and billions of dollars were hidden around the globe. So Switzerland was the conduit for this illegal business. And if you have an illegal business, the problem is you don't know what the next step is. Is there some nefarious business going on after that? And clearly that was the case. So the problem was, in Switzerland, they would never disclose anyone's name. So what had happened was, it was a long story, which I won't bore you with now, but I worked there and I complained internally at the bank and then tried to move forward. And if you would put that one slide on, Vlad, for me. Vlad, if you could put that up there for us. Anyways, what had happened was, in Switzerland, the problem was that they would never help anyone give up a name to a foreign government. Now, this document here was an internal PowerPoint presentation about Swiss bank secrecy. And this document, you can see here, starts off by talking about the law in 1935. This is very important. Why? Because this was given to clients to show to them that the bank was committed, as well as the Swiss government was committed to hiding their money. And this document goes on for a few pages. This is all on my website, of course, lucifersbanker.com. And you can see that they're talking about hiding the confidentiality as the basis for anything that they did in the country. As you go through the document, you can see that they talk about the Swiss finance minister saying it is non-negotiable. Well, in 2005, I resigned from the bank, and then I went to the legal and compliance departments of the bank, and they failed to answer me. So I resigned from the bank, and then I actually went up to the board of directors, and each board of director got my complaint. They did nothing except call for an investigation, which they covered up. At that point, I was fed up with the whole system, and I had resigned, so I went to my own government, the US government, thinking that they would be interested in this information. Unfortunately for me, I was the only banker in the world to go to jail in the financial crisis. The Department of Justice attacked me because I was actually educating them on something they should have uncovered. So the corruption within the Department of Justice, the corruption within, at the time, the Obama administration, the Treasury Department, the State Department, the White House, is ingrained. And you may say, well, you just have an axe to grind or something like this. No, I've got proof for it, and when you read my book, you'll see that it's all documented there. President Obama was actually taking millions of dollars from UBS for his campaign. At the same time, they were under a criminal investigation. Eric Holder, the Attorney General, was representing UBS in private practice, so he was conflicted. And I'll show another document here in a moment, which was a CIA cable, which I have Julian Assange to thank for it. Whether you like Julian Assange or not is not the question. The question is the information was exposed. There's a CIA cable, which I would ask Vlad to put that up there, the next document for me. And what you have is a CIA cable which no one ever expected to see, ever. And this document that they're putting up here in this moment, you will see exactly what went on. So by exposing this, what had happened was the US government put an amnesty in place, and a second amnesty, and then a third amnesty. What had happened was we only had 19,000 accounts. 100,000 Americans came in and became compliant. Now, you might say, well, geez, that's quite incredible. Over $10 billion was collected, and counting, because of one guy had the courage to come forward and do the right thing. So this document here is from Aftenposten. Aftenposten is a Norwegian newspaper that printed this document. Now, it might be hard for you to read here, but what's important is this was never expected to see your eyes or the world's eyes. This was a WikiLeaks cable that was released, but it was a CIA cable here. So what happened, if you go down a little further in this document, you'll see that right here at the end of this, it talks about bringing to the point a political solution to the UBS case. So Secretary of State Hillary Clinton was having secret meetings with the Swiss finance minister in 2008 and 2009. And what in fact she did was they closed a company in Denmark that was operating in Iran, and they took 2 Guantanamo detainees, Chinese Uyghurs, and sent them to Switzerland to settle this case. This is the largest tax fraud case in the world. UBS got fined $780 million. They were forced to give up 4,700 names of clients, a first in history, broke bank secrecy. The Parliament of Switzerland had to approve this. So this effectively destroyed it. After that, you begin to realize, why did this all happen? Well, again, when you see these WikiLeaks cables that expose the ingrained corruption within the US government, that's what begins to make you think, wait a minute, I thought this was a fair and just system. I thought it was transparent. It's far from transparent, it's far from fair. So what you see here on this one, it's a 2-page document, talks about political solution and the fixes within the government, the US government and the Swiss government. The Swiss represent the US interests in Cuba, Iran, and Libya, so they have a vested interest in doing it. When President Obama left office, he sent $1.4 billion in cash on a private jet from Geneva, Switzerland to Tehran. So you see the closeness between the two countries. And the reason why I mentioned the two, it's important to understand they had a vested interest to let this business continue, but they did not want it exposed. By me exposing this, it exposed all the banks, and they had to do something. There were congressional hearings, there were Senate investigations, there's 300-page reports, all on my website, you can go see them. And what it has effectively done is changed a $1 trillion industry overnight. So Switzerland, from that standpoint, has changed. The business model has changed. 130 banks in 2008, there's now 80. 50 banks have either merged or gone defunct, bankrupt. So this is a dramatic, cataclysmic change in banking. So now what you see is they have to play on a level playing field. Malta can compete with Switzerland. Paris can compete with Switzerland, and so on and so forth. So that's important because they had a monopoly. They had a competitive advantage which they were abusing for decades. Dictators, cheating, insider trading, bribery, extortion, money laundering, terrorist financing. If you don't have accountability, if you don't have transparency, you're going to have illegal acts taking place. It's a fact. Switzerland is a prime example for that, and we've seen it time and time again. As well as dictators. Dictators like Marcos, Bhutto, Pinochet. The list goes on. And the problem you have now is that now that you're cleaning it up, it came so quick they didn't know how to handle it. But yet they could blame the whistleblower, myself, who came in and attacked them. And that's exactly what happened. So in essence, what I've done is transform this industry. I wrote a book about it to tell everyone the story. And the website, of course, which is full of internal documents, which I didn't steal. I had them given to me by the bank, so I took them with me. So anything you see on my website has already been given to the government authorities and so forth, so it's free reading. But I'll just end in one note, is that when I met with Julian Assange in London, and I think this poor guy is going to be extradited out of the Ecuadorian embassy soon, he told me a situation with respect to why this was going on with WikiLeaks and how it paralleled with my whistleblowing, historic whistleblowing at UBS. And he said, look, some people have a gut instinct to do the right thing. Do you have the gut instinct to do the right thing if you see something wrong, to report something? I was fortunate enough to meet Daphne here in Malta before her demise, her murder, and this was a very unfortunate thing for Malta. And we talked for a little bit about this situation, about transparency and about offshore banking and so forth. And it brought it home to light that I had moved here from the United States, and I live here in Malta. And I got to know her very little, but we had this chat before she was murdered. And I think it's important to understand her demise is so important for all of us because she was a crusader, she was a fighter, just as I was a fighter, just as Julian Assange is a fighter. Mr. Snowden's a fighter. You may not like some of these people, you may have an opinion, and that's fine. But what their end result was better for all of society. And I think that's the message here. You're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. Which one is it?
Part of the solution.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Precisely. And that's where whistleblowing is paramount. And I'll sort of end on the whistleblowing note because I think it's important. I go around and lecture throughout Europe and Asia and America. And what I try to tell people is just think about it logically. If you're not breaking the law, you don't need whistleblowers. Don't break the law. So law enforcement should embrace whistleblowers, not attack them. They're an extension of law enforcement. They do their job better, whether they're understaffed, under budget, maybe even part of the problem. There are corrupt police out there and law enforcement. A whistleblower will come in and give you everything. Harry Markopoulos, great friend of mine, he exposed the Madoff fraud. He didn't get paid anything, but he did the right thing. He yelled and screamed for a decade until they did something about it. So the point I'm trying to make here is that whistleblowing, to protect whistleblowers, number one, and to compensate them, number two. And that's a controversial part here in Europe, but it works. I'm a prime example of why it works. I even started whistleblowing before the program came in play, so it wasn't about the money. Everyone says, oh, you did it for the money. Absolutely not. So my point is that Europe needs to pass, and Asia needs to pass, positive whistleblowing laws to protect and compensate whistleblowers. Why? Because they make your life better, your children's lives better, your grandchildren's lives better. Or we'll just go and we'll steal and cheat and lie, and we'll just keep that going. So you have a choice. What society you want to live in? So that's where whistleblowing is so paramount, and that's why I go around lecturing and send the message out. not just about what I did at UBS and in Switzerland, which was cataclysmic, as I said before, but also because it might send a message to each and every one of you, and your children if you have children, that this is so important to go ahead and praise whistleblowing. We've seen it time and time again, and as I said, if you're not breaking the law, you won't need whistleblowers. So let's promote the whistleblowing angle, and let's move forward to help everyone in that regard. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.